because of being shut in, because of distance, because of the problem with COVID. So a special welcome to you this morning as you join in our worship. Second lesson, our lesson from the New Testament this morning, is taken from 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 1 to 6. And I read from the New Revised Standard Version, which is just slightly different from the Pew Bible, but they're close enough that you can follow along. It's on page 94 in the Pew Bibles, if you wish. Paul writes to the church at Corinth these words, and through the scriptures to us this morning. It is necessary to boast. Nothing is to be gained by it, but I will go on to the revelations and visions of the Lord. I know a person in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up into the third heaven. Whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, God knows. And I know that such a person, whether in the body or out of the body, I do not know, God knows, was caught up into paradise and heard things that are not to be told, that no mortal is permitted to repeat. On behalf of such a one, I will boast. But on my own behalf, I will not boast except of my weakness. But if I wish to boast, I will not be a fool, for I am telling the truth. Let us pray. Loving and gracious God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations and reflections of all our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Well, our biblical passages for today describe two very memorable mystical experiences that are found in the pages of the Bible. The first, as you remember, that Amy read so beautifully for us, taken from 1 Kings chapter 19, happened to the prophet Elijah. Feeling defeated and under threat of death, Elijah fled to the wilderness, and there on Mount Horeb, in the middle of the Sinai desert, he heard God speak to him and tell him to stand at the mouth of the cave he was sleeping and taking refuge in, for the Lord was about to pass by. As he does so, a great wind comes up, then an earthquake, and finally a raging fire. And after each natural catastrophe, the biblical writer notes, but the Lord was not in the wind, not in the earthquake, not in the fire. Finally, after all of these events, there is, as the New International Version puts it, there was a gentle whisper. Or as the New Revised Standard Version puts it, the sound of sheer silence. And it was in this silence that Elijah heard God speak to his heart. The second mystical experience is found in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, and it's not described in nearly as much detail. Indeed, the Apostle Paul mentions it in passing, almost apologetically. It concerns a person Paul knew, although many scholars think he's really talking about himself at this stage, who's caught up into the third heaven, caught up into paradise, and heard esoteric things, as Paul puts it, that no mortal is permitted to repeat. I myself have had four profound mystical experiences in my life. One when I was 17, flying home from a visit to a childhood friend in Texas, a very low point in my life, overwhelmed with thoughts of suicide and depression. And on that plane ride home, suddenly time and space disappeared. And I sensed that God loved me with this profound and very deep love. The second took place in a Toronto hospital room, where the husband of a church member shared a vision he had of God's grace and love, which in an instant turned him from a bitter, fearful, angry man into one at peace with himself and at peace with God. The third also took place in a hospital room, this time in Moncton, where sitting by the bed of a church member who was dying from prostate cancer and was filled with morphine so that he couldn't talk to anybody, since they're trying to push him over the edge, as it were, since he's in such pain. And he came out of that morphine-induced fog, and he saw me. He reached out and he grabbed my hand and he said, "Mark, this is a person who felt broken by God because he felt he's being punished for his sin through this prostate cancer." He grabbed my hand and he said, "Mark, after the brokenness comes healing, and after the healing comes simplicity." And the fourth took place after my 35-foot fall from the tree in front of my house. Hovering between life and death, I had a vision of this green archway pulsating, bright as jade. And inside a golden light and what I took to be fields in the distance. And as I lay there on the hard gravel, I felt within me an overwhelming sense of peace and tranquility. Now, mysticism is not stressed in our Baptist, indeed in our Protestant tradition at all. Our stress in the Baptist church or Protestant churches falls upon doctrine, upon believing the right things, or upon social action, upon doing the right things, with more conservative Protestant churches tending to emphasize correct doctrine, that is, correct beliefs, while more liberal churches tending to put a greater emphasis on social issues and social justice. And this is unfortunate, I believe, because while correct doctrine and correct actions are vitally important for the health of the Christian faith, for the importance of Christian living, so too is this emphasis upon mysticism, upon the pathway of mysticism. In fact, the great Roman Catholic theologian Karl Rahner once claimed that the Christian of the future must be a mystic, or he or she will not be Ronner foresaw, you see, in Europe where he lived and worked, that fewer and fewer people would attend church and that the institution of the Christian church would lose influence steadily but surely. And in this he was and is correct, at least in regard to Europe and Canada, but not globally, as globally the church has expanded, exploded in Asia and South America, in Africa. But here in Canada, Ronner unfortunately was bang on. In our immediate area, 7 churches have closed down, and while some of this is attributable to people going from smaller churches to larger churches, most of it is not. Take the United Church, for example, the largest Protestant denomination in Canada, which at the time of church union numbered 600,000 people when the population of Canada was only 9 million. Today, when the population of Canada numbers 38 million people, it is halved in membership, 300,000. And of that 300,000, only 35,000 go to church on a weekly basis. And so, back to Ronner's insistence that the Christian of the future must be a mystic, or he or she will not be, because correct action and correct doctrine depend far more on a healthy church institution than mysticism does. Correct doctrine needs teaching, it needs a robust Sunday school, it needs varied education program. Correct action needs group action and planning and finances and support and participation. But mysticism does not always need a healthy church institution, which is why Ronner felt it was vital for the Christian of the future to be a mystic. The problem, as I mentioned, is that we have no tradition really of mysticism in our Protestant faith. We have no training for it and little sympathy for it because it really doesn't fit with our activistic lifestyles. My friend Vicki Patton, for example, she's worked hard at cultivating a spirit of mysticism. She reads the spiritual classics and she goes to retreats now and then. In fact, just last week, she was over at the house with her husband Eric, and she told us that she'd be attending a Roman Catholic retreat in Cape Breton. This retreat was based on silence, and for 5 days she would be in silence, neither speaking nor being spoken to. When she shared this with us, I said to Margie, well, that's not for us. No internet, no TV, no conversation with anyone for 5 days. Indeed, we don't even know in our Baptist and Protestant tradition, we don't really even understand what mysticism is. We think it's some esoteric activity, and to be fair, from the examples I mentioned in my own life and the biblical ones, one might be led to think that this is true, but most mystical experiences are brief and transitory. They are a fleeting sense of oneness with the divine. That's what a mystical experience is, this fleeting sense of being one with something that transcends you with God. And that's at heart all mysticism is about. And so fortunately here at Pereaux, we do have 2 great resources that help us develop this mystical awareness. The first is the musical tradition that has always been part of this Pereaux Baptist Church community, sometimes ebbing to be sure, but always there. Today, under Ruth and Kelly, it's being revived and vibrant once again, which is great. Because for me at least, and I suspect for others as well, music is one way in which we develop that mystical awareness, that sense of unity with God. Ruth mentioned this at Andy's farewell a couple of weeks ago, how music was so often the way that God spoke to her and touched her heart. Music entertains us, it amuses us, it encourages us, but every now and then it does something more. Every now and then it helps us escape the ego of ourselves. We feel like we're in touch for just a moment with the divine. And now the trouble is, of course, that good church music depends on a healthy institution too. Right now, we can't really sing in 4-part harmony because we don't have enough men in the choir. So we need some more men, according to Kelly. And this is where the second resource that we have in abundance here in the Pereaux community is so important, because it doesn't depend very much, if it depends at all, on the institution of a healthy church, and that is the resource of nature. There is so much natural beauty in this place that we live in. And this beauty can be, if we're still and we reflect on it for just a moment, this beauty can be a window to the love and to the beauty that God has for us. Not long ago, Margie and I went up to Ottawa after the election to take a break and visit my daughter and our grandson, and see her sister and mother. And we had a good time, and it was a needed change and a lot of fun. But in the hustle and bustle of Ottawa, which has exploded in growth, I didn't feel the connection to God that I feel here in Pereaux. The evening after arriving home, I was walking along Hubbard Mountain Road. The trees were mottled gray with just a hint, a splash of orange and crimson, while in the distance the North Mountain was washed with colors of blue and indigo. Overhead, a few stars were just beginning to shine in the night sky, appearing and disappearing like celestial butterflies. And suddenly, while walking, I stopped for just a moment, no more. But it was enough for me to sense God's power, God's majesty, and to feel for just a brief moment a sense of oneness with God. Little wonder that I love the poetry of Wendell Berry, as I know Richard does as well, and especially his poem, The Peace of Wild Things, which goes like this. When despair for the world grows in me, and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's life may be, I go and lie down where the wooddrake rests in his beauty on the water, and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things, who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a moment, I rest in the grace of the world, and I am free. This week, I encourage you, for just a moment, quiet your heart, still your mind, and sense, if only in passing, the grace of God shining through the beauty of this world that we live in, this beautiful part of the world we live in. And feel, for just a moment, but a moment's openness, or oneness with the God who made you and the God around you. To help you in that, there is this wonderful video on a song by Ryan Dirksen, I believe, that I shared with the church before, but we're going to share it now.
fragrance of a rose in bloom, a newborn's cry at birth. How could I say there is no God when all around creation calls a singing bird, a mighty tree, the vast expanse of open seas? I love to stand at ocean shore and feel the thundering breakers roar, to walk through golden fields of grain, beneath endless blue horizons free.
Now may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace.